In alhamdulillah wa salat wa salam Allah wa rasulallah. I'd like to start off first of all by apologizing to the people on Facebook. I don't know what's going on with that Facebook, but they're not allowing me to broadcast. So if you want to participate in the classes, you're going to have to come into the website. Go to Sunnahfollowers.net, follow the instructions, and come in here. Okay. Today we're going to finish up the collection of Sahih Muslim by going over the last several hadiths in Kitab Tafsir, which is the book of commentary. And these are hadiths addressing the verse of the Quran in regards to adornment and worship, in regards to worship, prostitution, and the likes. And let's start with the first hadiths here. Ibn Abbas explained to the companions the meaning of a hadith where the meaning of a verse of the Quran where Allah says in the interpretation of the meaning, has not the time yet come for the believers that their hearts should be humble for the remembrance of Allah? Ibn Masud, not Ibn Abbas, Ibn Masud said, since our acceptance to Islam and the revelation of this verse in which Allah has shown annoyance to us, he said there was a period of 4 years gap. It took 4 years, in other words, for the Muslims to reach this level where their hearts were humbled for the remembrance of Allah. Dawah is not an easy thing. It takes a while for people to change, to condition themselves, and first of all, stand up and admit that they need to change. Because we all like to believe that our way is the right way, that we understand our purpose, we understand our religion and all of this, when in reality we don't. So Allah is going to test you. Again, like he says in the Quran, just because you say you believe in him is not enough. He's going to test you to see if you truly believe in him. And the interval between when Allah sent that verse down was a gap of 4 years. It took 4 years. So 4 years for the Muslims to reach that level, whereas their hearts were humbled, were purified and humbled for the remembrance of Allah. In the next hadith, Ibn Abbas explains a verse of the Quran to us. He speaks about the verse where Allah says, adorn yourself at every place of worship. He said during the pre-Islamic days, in other words, before Islam came to Arabia, the women used to make pilgrimage to the Kaaba and they would go around it naked without any clothes on. And they used to say, who will provide clothing to cover us who are circumambulating the Kaaba? And they would say, today will be exposed the whole or part of what is exposed. In other words, women didn't care about not wearing clothes. They would make Hajj and walk around the Kaaba butt naked. And so then that's when Allah sent down the pillar commanding us Muslims to make Hajj. And not just Hajj, but even when we go to the mosque to pray, he says, cover yourself. Cover yourself before Allah. Do not stand before Allah naked like that. Cover yourself. Show some humility before Allah. Have some respect, in other words, because the pagans had no respect for Allah. Okay, so he explains what that verse means, and it's not just speaking about making Hajj, but anytime you go to pray. When you want to pray at the mosque, make sure you cover yourself out of respect as a woman. As again, whenever we women go out in the public, we're supposed to cover ourselves, to have some respect for ourselves. Well, you want to also show respect for Allah. So that's why even when we make salat, we have to cover our body. You don't have to cover your face but you have to cover the rest of your body just as if you were going outside the house. So for this verse is in regards to us women. Whenever we women go to pray or worship Allah, we have to make sure we're covered. Now, this does not apply to supplications. It's talking about the actual ritual that we have to go through every day to perform the daily prayers. And also is speaking about making Hajj. Now, when you want to make supplication, you don't have to have a hijab on or any of that. You can supplicate and call upon Allah whenever you want to. But if you're going to worship Him, to pray to Him, to go through the ritual of Salat, you have to cover your body. Does everyone understand that? And this is for us women. And that's why it was sent down, because before Islam, the women didn't cover up. They would worship Allah naked. Okay. Also, the next hadiths speak about something else here. One of the companions explains the verse where Allah says in the Quran, in the interpretation of meaning, do not force your slave girls to prostitution when they desire to keep themselves chaste. Whoever makes them do that, then surely after their compulsion, Allah is forgiven. In other words, what Allah is saying here is, if someone forces you, if a man forces you or someone forces you to commit illegal sexual relations, Allah is going to punish them, not you, because they forced you. And what made this verse come down? Well, one of the companions tells us that Abdullah ibn Ubay, he was one of the leaders of the Quraysh. He was one of the enemies of Allah. He had two slave girls. One was named Musaika and the other one was named Mumayma. These two slave girls converted to Islam. He forced them. He forced them to go out and prostitute. And when those girls, when he made them do that, they went to the Prophet and complained and cried. They said, look what he made us do. And that's when Allah said, don't be upset. Allah doesn't hold you accountable for what other people forced you to do. And that's not just with this. This is with anything. Anytime somebody forces us to do something, Allah doesn't hold us to account for that. He holds the person that forced you to account. And also Allah sent this verse down to let people know that this is haram. It's haram to do that. You can't force women to prostitute themselves. Prostitution is a sin, a horrific sin in Islam. Rape, prostitution, all those things are horrific sins. I tell people all the time, you want to hear about the struggles these companions had. You want to talk about how when you came over here in the slave boat and how they forced you as a slave and raped you. The same thing happened with the companions. Many of those young, beautiful female companions were forced into prostitution because they believed in Allah. So this stuff happens. I mean, women are always taken advantage of, whether it's slavery and everything in war times and everything else. Okay, and so Allah comforted these two girls because these two girls were traumatized. They were young girls. And because they had converted to Islam, Ibn Ubay forced them to do that. Took away their virtue, took away their virtue and their dignity, and the girls felt stripped. They were so upset. They felt like trash. They felt like they weren't good enough, for Allah for Allah to forgive and allow in paradise. And that's when Allah sent that verse down, comforting them, telling them, it's not on you. Allah is forgiving and merciful. Because you were forced. After you were forced, don't think that you are not good enough for me, because I am more forgiving than anything. And that's when Allah let it be known, this is a horrific thing to do, to force your women into prostitution. Don't do this. This is a major sin. It brings about a terrible punishment with Allah. And for the pimp, the punishment in most Muslim countries is death. If you lived in an Islamic country and you were prostituting girls, that's the punishment, death. Because you've killed them. You kill them, in their insides. You kill them morally, because that's a humiliating thing to do. So the punishment is equal, that it would be death for you to do that. So in a Muslim country, you end up being a pimp and be caught doing that, you're going to be executed. Okay, so like I tell you guys, no one suffered more than these companions. We can talk about all the holocausts of every people, but nobody's holocaust is worse than the companions had to endure. And these were two beautiful younger, and they were young, real young, like early teens, 13, 14 years old, and they did this to them. Okay. Also, Ibn Masud. And by the way, let me give you a little bit of history about Ibn Masud. Ibn Masud became one of the first scholars of the Quran. He was one of the companions whom the Prophet made dua for, asking Allah to give him a deep understanding of the Quran. And so Ibn Masud is one of his Tafsirs is one of the ones we always look for, him and Ibn Abbas, because the prophet made supplication for both of them, asking Allah to bless them both with great understandings of the Quran, and Allah answered that supplication for them. So after the prophet's death, the people would come to Ibn Masud, they would come to Ibn Abbas. That's why you see so many things narrated by these two companions, and ask, the meaning of verses, to them. So here we have in this hadith Ibn Masud explaining what Allah meant when he said, those to whom they call upon themselves seek the means to access their Lord as to whoever of them becomes nearest. He said this verse of the Quran was sent down in regards to the jinn. Some of the ignorant Arabic people used to worship the jinn. Now, as every Muslim knows, the jinn will be held accountable just like us. On a day of judgment, they will stand next to us and be judged too. Allah gave them free will just like he gave us. Okay? The jinn are supposed to worship Allah and his oneness just like us. The jinn are part of the unseen world. We cannot see them, but they can see us. Well, anyway, the Arabs used to worship the jinn before Islam. After the event of Islam, many of the jinn converted to Islam. The Prophet Muhammad, whenever he received a revelation from Allah, he would first of all go and teach it to the people. And then he would go to the jinn and teach them the Quran too. Okay? So some of the jinn embraced Islam. And they are the ones who Allah refers to in the Quran as our brothers. But then the other ones did not. And there were some people who embraced Islam and they still continued to worship the jinn. And that's why Allah sent that verse down. You keep calling upon the jinn. The jinn cannot help you. And believe it or not, guys, today, there are Muslims today who still worship the jinn. Again, just because you say you're a Muslim doesn't mean that you're a believer. Okay, the believer that would never associate partners with Allah. But there are people to this day who call themselves Muslims that still worship the jinn. The jinn are our enemies. They are not our friends. The jinn are not our protectors. Our protectors are the angels. The angels are the friends of the believers. The angels are the protectors of the believers. And even still, we don't worship angels either. The only entity that we worship is Allah. Okay? And that's what Ibn Abbas was explaining to us about as to how those verses were revealed. And let's look at the final hadiths here. These hadiths are in regards to the surah, the chapter of forgiveness in the Quran, AL-ANFAL, HASHR, and also verses about wine. One of the companions went to Ibn Abbas and asked Ibn Abbas about Surah TAUBA. That's the chapter of the Quran speaking about repentance. And Ibn Abbas told him this surah is meant, Allah sent it down to humiliate the non-believers and the hypocrites. And that's why when you read that chapter of the Quran, it's constant a reference made to them and they. some of them and some of they. He's speaking about the hypocrites amongst us. Okay? Because there's a lot of people who claim to believe in Allah, but they really don't. And like I told you, what is the difference between a mere Muslim and a believer? Well, a believer would never, ever, ever deliberately, intentionally disobey Allah. That's the difference. But there's a lot of Muslims out there who do. So can we refer to them as being believers? Okay, so that's what Ibn Abbas was explaining, about that. He said, in regards to the chapter Anfal, he said this chapter relates to the Battle of Badr. Allah sent that chapter down, as a result of the Battle of Badr. And in regards to the chapter Al-HASHR, he said it was sent down in connection with the tribe of Nadir. This was one of the tribes that refused to accept Islam, and they created a lot of havoc amongst the Muslims. They had a lot of hypocrites amongst them. Many of them had embraced Islam but created a lot of fitna. Okay, so that's what Ibn Abbas is telling us about why Allah sent down those chapters. And in the next hadith, which is the last hadith in the whole collection, speaks about how Umar delivered a khutbah, and he's addressed the verses where Allah forbids alcohol. He said when the prohibition against alcohol was revealed, back then we used to make alcohol from wheat, barley, dates, grape, and honey. And Allah said all these things are haram for us to ferment. You can't ferment barley. You can't ferment dates and grapes and honey, because when you ferment them, they become alcohol. And alcohol clouds the intellect. He said the Prophet broke it down. There is no reason for any Muslim to indulge in intoxicants, not just wine and alcohol, but drugs too. Marijuana. Marijuana is an intoxicant. The Prophet explained to us anything that clouds the mind, anything that makes you high is an intoxicant. And all intoxicants are haram. So that includes LSD, heroin, crack, crank, marijuana, hashish, all those drugs that people do. So Umar was telling us the Prophet broke it down. There is no question that all intoxicants, anything that makes you high, is haram. He said, I wish what the Prophet had done was went into detail about the laws of inheritance in regards to the grandparents. And I wish the Prophet had spoken more detail about what happens if a person has no children and they die. He said, but there's no excuse for you guys to sit around questioning intoxicants, because the Prophet clearly broke that down to us. And that's the same thing I tell Muslims today. You have some sinful Muslims out there who do drugs. They smoke marijuana, they smoke hash, they smoke crack or crank or heroin or snort glue or whatever. And then they'll tell you, oh, Allah doesn't mention in the Quran. Yes, he does. He said anything that intoxicates the mind, anything that alters the mind is an intoxicant, and it's haram. So this is something that he did break down. That includes marijuana. Marijuana does cloud your intellect. Hash, it clouds your intellect. Crack, crank, heroin, LSD. All this stuff clouds your intellect. So without a doubt, you can't take it. Even for something like myself, we have to be careful with narcotics out there. Say, for example, Tylenol 3. Tylenol 3 is a narcotic that the doctors will give to you sometimes for pain. I can't take it because Tylenol 3 makes me high. It alters my brain. I can't take Darvons. I cannot take anything stronger than extra strength Tylenol, because anything stronger than extra strength Tylenol is an intoxicant for me. It alters my mind, my intellect. So, it's haram for me. When I have surgery, my doctors never give me anything but regular extra strength Tylenol. It's in my file. If I ever give her just Tylenol, because anything else is going to have a bad effect on me. Okay, so again, for those Muslims today claiming that they don't understand why they can't get high and smoke marijuana, shame on you, because the Prophet was clear on these things. He was more clear about intoxicants than he was about inheritance. Okay, so on that note, we're going to stop right here for today. And again, this completes all the books of Sahih Muslim. Alhamdulillah, for those of you who've been coming here and been with me for the past 2 years, we've completed the entire collection. What I'm going to do tomorrow is give you a quiz to cover what we discussed today, and then we're going to move on to a different topic, and I will announce the topic later. Don't ask me what the topic's going to be now, because I can't answer. I have to be inspired, and I'll post the topic up later. So we'll stop right here. If you guys have any questions or comments, inshallah, you can type them on the screen. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika.